Ernie Ball presents How to Musician with Cory Wong.
Songwriter. How about lyrical composition and melodic linguo/melodic coordination and management supervisor, 20 years. Band leader. Too simple. Hiring and personnel. No, needs to sound more professional. Wayward musician aggregation and rehabilitation specialist.
A solid gig can be hard to come by, so it's no wonder that the process of actually landing one can be filled with anxiety. Am I underprepared? Have I sent too many emails? Am I even good enough for this gig to begin with? These kind of thoughts usually come from the fear of being rejected. But a lot of the time we lose out on a gig just because the other person auditioning was the best man at the band leader's cousin's wedding or something like that. And although we can't control every factor that goes into getting the gig, there are some that we definitely can. In this video, I want to share some of my tips on how to get the gig, and maybe more importantly, how to lose it. I mean, not lose it. You get it.
How to get the gig. This is where we're gonna start. Now, people ask me all the time how I got certain gigs, and I'm gonna get there. But first off, I think there's some just kind of ground rule things that everybody needs to know. Some 101 on getting gigs. First off, you just have to be good at what you do. That might seem like a given, but sometimes people take that for granted. So you need to be really good at what you do. And the other thing is, if you are actually doing something just overtly, am I gonna get the gig or not, like an audition, be prepared. Make sure that you got the stuff together. Because the reality is this, you might not always be the best musician in the room. Most of the time, you won't. But you can always be the most prepared musician in the room. And that goes miles beyond you would even imagine. Because sometimes the absolute best musician in the world shows up and they're underprepared, and if they don't know that the bridge goes to the 4 chord and you do, all of a sudden, you look like a better musician than they do for a split second because of your preparedness. That's one of the things that we can control. Now, there are certain things that we can't control, but I think the things that we can control, make sure you have those dialed in. Certain things you can control, like how prepared are you? How technically proficient are you on your instrument? And what is actually needed? And are you too technically proficient in the way that you're playing? Some music requires you to have a little more restraint. These are all taste and control things that you can actually really hone in. Other things are the way that you dress. Are you the right vibe visually for the gig? That matters to a lot of people. And it matters for most gigs. Is your stage vibe super happy and yeah, fun? Or is it like this sort of thing? You might want to adjust a little bit. Now, of course, you need to be yourself and not be a fake, but there are certain things that you can kind of lean one way or the other to kind of prepare yourself and present yourself in a way that matches the gig you're trying to get. Okay. How did I get some of my gigs? People ask me all the time, how did you get the gig with Wolfpack? How did you end up playing with Ben Rector or Fearless Flyers or any of these things? Well, I'm going to take you along on that journey, how I got those gigs, because the journey basically takes me down the path of how I think anybody gets gigs these days. Now let's start with Wolfpack. How did I get that gig? Well, we need to rewind the clock several years, and we'll go back to when I was in college. When I was in college, I had a professor named Bobby Stanton. He used to play guitar at a church. Somebody in the church was getting married. They asked Bobby to play guitar at their wedding. Bobby was unavailable, so he suggested that I play it. I played at the wedding. The pastor there at the church liked my vibe, liked the way that I played, and he invited me to be part of the worship band on Sunday morning a few weeks later. I did a really good job. I was really well prepared. I was respectful. I was professional. They asked me to start coming back. Fast forward a few months, there was a guest worship leader named Robert Robinson, who is an insane, incredible gospel singer. One of the best singers, most heartfelt, emotional singers I've ever played with in my entire life. Robert was a guest there. He liked the way that I played. He liked my vibe. He asked me to join his Christmas tour that winter. I did the tour. Fast forward a few months, he is a guest for a guy named Larry Long's American Roots Review, and he was putting together a band for it. They needed a guitar player, and Robert was one of the singers who suggested, hey, there's this young kid, Cory, who's really great. He's been crushing it on my gig. Why don't you have him play? Larry said, great, that's awesome. I played that gig. On Larry's gig, the drummer that was hired to play was Michael Bland. Michael Bland is kind of the de facto band leader for Dr. Mambo's Combo for the Sunday and Monday night jam thing over at Bunkers in Minneapolis. He liked the way that I played on the Larry Long gig. He said, hey, why don't you come down to Bunkers, start hanging out a little bit more. I want you to kind of sit in, see how you fit in with the band there. The guitar player there needs a sub, and you seem like you might be a good fit. So for a while, I started going down, hanging out on Sunday and Monday night, sitting in with the band, starting to jam, get comfortable. I learned their entire catalog, which was not easy to do. It was like 250 songs or something like that. But I was determined to get the gig. I wanted to be the sub. Now we fast forward a few months after that. Billy, the guitar player, had a bowling injury. Yes, a bowling injury. He had to get rotator cuff surgery. Yikes. And he was out for about 6 months to a year or something like that. So I was the sub guitar player for that entire time over at Bunkers for the Sunday and Monday night hang. Fast forward a few months, there's one night where Jack, Joe, and Theo from Wolfpack came in with an artist named Darren Criss, who they were on tour with. They decided after their gig, go to this hang at Bunkers, heard it's amazing. I look in the crowd, see, oh, these guys look like they're my age. They look like they're musicians, because you can just kind of like tell who the musicians are in the audience when you're a musician playing on stage sometimes. At set break, I got down. Theo came up and said, bro, I love the way you play. You're so dope. We have a mutual friend in Caleb Howley, and we hung out all night, became friends, went out for breakfast the next morning. I, at the time, was going back and forth from Minneapolis to LA a lot for work, and a lot of those guys were living there at the time, so I started hanging out. We became friends, and eventually we started jamming a little bit together. Then Jack invited me to be a part of a Wolfpack album and some live shows, and then he just kind of absorbed me to being part of the band. And it's as simple as that. So, if we take a look back from the very beginning of that story, what did we have? A recommendation because I knew somebody. So a lot of the places that we get gigs are because of the people that we know. For me, it was my professor Bobby who recommended me for a gig that he was unavailable for. And why did he recommend me? Because I was somebody that always showed up to my classes really prepared. I worked really hard, and he saw some spark of goodness in the way that I play guitar. And the next steps in the journey were kind of the same thing. I came prepared. I acted in a professional way. I did my job well. I listened to what the leaders were asking of me, and I delivered. The place that it kind of changes up is on the Bunkers gig. When Michael invited me to do that, he wasn't inviting me to be part of the band. He was inviting me to see what the scene is like and if it's something that I would be remotely interested in. So I went there, checked it out. I thought, this is the gig that I want in town. It's not the thing that I want to do forever, but I did notice Prince would come hang out at the gig a lot. He would sit in the back corner with his crew, and that's where sometimes he would even get some of the musicians that were playing in his band at the time. And a lot of other artists that were touring that came through Minneapolis would go out to Bunkers on Sunday or Monday nights after their gigs. John Mayer, Jimmy Vaughn, Victor Wooten, Roy Hargrove. There's so many people that I saw and even jammed with at Bunkers because it was just a nice hang and the band was slamming. So I knew that it was a scene that I wanted to be a part of, and I needed to make a point to Michael that I was serious about it. So I went out of my way to learn the 250 song catalog without him asking me to directly. Eventually he would test me. It would start with easy songs like, hey, you know September, I Want You Back, that sort of thing. Yeah. Then it was, hey, do you know Serpentine Fire? Hey, do you know In the Stone? Hey, do you know Stomp? Do you know Free by Denise Williams? Yes. He just was kind of testing me because he was seeing what I knew. I happened to get the entire catalog and some board tapes from the front of house engineer who was a friend of mine. So I had a little advantage there because I had a friend who helped me get all that material and learn all their arrangements. Now where it shifts is I'm playing at bunkers and you never know who's gonna be in the audience watching you play. You could be doing a gig at a coffee shop, you could be doing a gig at Madison Square Garden, and there will be people there that are eyeing you up and sizing you up. And some people are just really inspired by the way that you play and do your thing that they want to absorb you into their band. And then from there, it's, are you the right fit? With Wolfpack, I wasn't a part of the band right away. It was, we were hanging out, we were good friends, and then eventually started jamming together. And on both sides realized it's kind of a perfect fit and just feels like it makes sense to be part of the band. So here we are. Now, when it comes to the Fearless Flyers, how did I get that gig? Well, it's just a side project of Wolfpack that Jack has been talking about for a long time. And on the road, Jack and Joe and I were scheming up how to make the project happen, and we just made it happen. So that's that. Another path that's kind of interesting to look at is how I got the Ben Rector gig. And it's no different than the others, other than it's just a different branch out of the same tree. Now, if we rewind back to that Larry Long gig where I met Michael Bland, the bass player on that gig was a guy named Billy Peterson, who played with the Steve Miller Band forever. He was on Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks. He's insane. He's played on tons of records. Billy is part of the Peterson family, which is all over the Twin Cities music scene and the national and international music scene. Like Ricky Peterson plays for Fleetwood Mac. He was on Continuum, toured with John Mayer for years. Paul Peterson has played all over the world, was Peter Frampton and so many other people. Anyways, Billy was on the gig playing bass. Some of the other Peterson family members were there in the audience. There's a guy named Stuart Pastor, who's kind of one of the godfathers of the Twin Cities music scene, who said, we need you as a part of the Peterson family band for a couple of these gigs. I started playing some of those gigs. He was in the audience. It's an example of somebody being in the audience who wanted me to be a part of the thing that he was putting together. Paul Peterson was on that gig, and he said, Cory, you're great. You'd be great for this gig with this country singer, Brian White. I did some gigs with this country singer, Brian White. On one of them, I met a guy named Walt Smith, who was the manager for a CCM artist named Jason Gray. Walt said, Cory, you'd be great for this Jason Gray gig. I played the Jason Gray gig. On one of the festivals that we were playing, he was kind of co-headlining with an artist named Brandon Heath. Brandon didn't have his band with him, and he said, hey, what if we share a band and we just kind of use the same band and switch off, which is sometimes common in certain genres of music. Okay, cool. So then eventually I started playing with Brandon and Jason. Brandon took me out on tour. Then I started playing around with a bunch of different artists in the CCM scene and a lot of Nashville artists, that sort of thing. I eventually got a place in Nashville and was commuting back and forth a lot from Minneapolis to Nashville. And then eventually just got connected with different things in the Nashville scene, which is where Ben Rector lives. Ben was looking for a fifth member of his touring outfit and asked the other guys in the band for recommendations. Steve Gould, who was the drummer in Ben's band at the time, recommended me. Why? Because of the church gig that I played that Bobby Stanton didn't play at the wedding for. Steve was the drummer at that church. And some of the other guys in the band who were from Nashville knew about me from just the Nashville scene. So there was kind of two sides of it. And that's how I ended up starting to play with Ben. I didn't audition. It was all recommendations. And he just looked up my YouTube and my Instagram stuff, like I talked about in the previous episode of the Social Media Muso. Having all that stuff together allows yourself the opportunity to be seen in different angles and in different ways by artists who might be hiring musicians to play for them.
Now, when I was in college and just out of college, one of the good ways to find a gig was Craigslist. And before that, newspapers. That's a completely antiquated way of doing it now. You're never gonna get a gig from a newspaper. But hey, who am I to say? Maybe like Bon Iver is putting ads up in newspapers or something, in the Eau Claire Times or something. I don't know, whatever. If you're gonna try to get a gig on Craigslist though, you're gonna need to know some of the terminology. So I wanna take a look at some of these Craigslist ads, people that are looking for guitar players, and decipher some of the Craigslist code on what certain phrases mean when they write them down. First things first, you're gonna wanna find your city, community, musicians. I'm looking down here, scrolling through. Okay,
Guitarist wanted for weekend club gigs. Here we go. We got the trifecta of Craigslist code. Pro gear, pro attitude, professional. Pro gear, they don't want you showing up with some janky cables. Your stuff needs to work. Pro attitude, you need to be there to work. This isn't a party band. Professional means they're kind of looking for some experience. Now, reading those three things maybe tells me they're a little bit corporate, but also tells me they've probably got some money. So it could be a nice trade-off. Let's check out some others. Moving on. Okay, guitarist wanted for GB gig. Now, here's some inside baseball. GB stands for general business. Not something normally used in the Minneapolis music scene. This person might be from the East Coast. We normally say jobbing band, or in the UK they say function band. These are terms for bands that play weddings, bar mitzvahs, private parties, that sort of thing. Okay, this is an interesting ad for a jobbing band because it starts off kind of interesting. Our band loves Grateful Dead and Fish. Interesting first line for a jobbing band, but okay. Love Grateful Dead, Fish, rock out, country, psychedelic rock. All right. Here's where we get into the Craigslist code. Classic Craigslist code here. Good vibes only, 420 friendly. That means they do drugs. Most likely marijuana, but potentially some psychedelics in there as well. Interesting for a band that's gonna be playing weddings, but I'm not one to judge. All right, let's keep looking. Let's find one more. All right, here we go. Church band seeking guitar player. Good place to play some gigs. This is actually how I got started, is by playing in church. This ad says, church band seeking guitar player. Seems like a normal gig. We're looking for a guitar player to join our church band. 2 services every weekend and rehearse every Tuesday night. That's pretty standard. Seems normal. Please join us in our beautiful sanctuary. Our illustrious compound is guarded by our Galadorian staff members that will be sure to greet you upon arrival. Please come as you are and be prepared to play for many. We'll provide robes. Please provide your measurements. Our mothership departs at the first light of the third moon. Hail Zoltar, master of the second universe eternal. Let his ever-glowing light shine upon you to sanctify us from our sentient human bodies. Totally not a cult. Looking forward to our transcendence to get... Okay, maybe Craigslist is not the place to get a gig anymore. All right, now we got to talk about how to lose the gig or not lose the gig. But I'm going to address both because both are important. Here's the deal. Every gig ends at some point. Either you get fired, you quit, maybe somebody in the band dies, or maybe things just kind of like fell apart and dissolved. There are a bunch of different ways that gigs end, but I want to talk about how you can do it gracefully. How can you exit your band gracefully? How can you exit your job gracefully? And it's universal. It's beyond just music. It's just like jobs and relationships. Certain things just end or move on. You're not friends with all of the same people you were friends with in high school. Things change, people change, relationships change, artistic vision changes, and that's okay. What's important to do is understand how to exit a situation gracefully. Now, the easiest way to lose a gig is by getting fired. You show up wasted, you show up unprepared, you bring your personal problems to rehearsals and the gigs, and you just have a sour attitude about the whole thing. There's very easy ways for you to get fired. I don't want to go into those because I just don't want to. But how you leave a gig gracefully has a subtle art to it. It's important to have clear communication on why you want to leave the gig and what that timeline looks like and logistically what that might look like if you're the one quitting somebody else's band. Or if you are the artist and asking somebody to leave and you're just looking for something else, I think it's important there for there to be communication as well. So my suggestion to somebody who would be leaving another artist's gig is make sure that you clearly communicate why are you leaving the gig. Is it another opportunity that came up? Is it you're just not feeling as connected to the music? That's okay. Is it a personal thing? Then work it out and then quit the thing. But if it's not a personal thing, just make that very clear because sometimes in situations like this, as in any relationship, friendship, professional setting, sometimes people will take things personal that really are not personal at all. So make sure If it's just artistic differences, that's okay. If it's that you need more time to focus on your own project, I think that artist will respect you because they've done the same thing and made that same decision at some point in their life to get where they are. It can be a really good thing for you to have a replacement kind of set up and ready to go. But with that, you also have to kind of be careful because you don't want to get a few options of people that you've really gotten their hopes up on. Hey, I'm gonna leave this gig, do you want it? You don't want to get their hopes up and then have them just not get the gig. And you also don't want to commit anybody that the artist doesn't really know, or they might have their own replacement or somebody who would sub for you in mind anyways. But I think it's important that you do have some people that you would suggest for the artist. If I'm quitting a gig, hey, here's some people I would recommend. But one of the most important things that you do when you leave a situation like a band is to not burn bridges. It can leave a sour taste for the artist that you're playing for, but also all of the other people involved. Maybe there's a whole crew involved, and maybe there's a whole other band involved that now there's like this weird tension and this weird thing. You don't want that. That artist might be managed by a manager who manages your favorite band that you want to be a part of. And if you left a sour taste in this artist's mouth and they told their manager, that manager might never, ever even consider you for that favorite band of yours that you want to be a part of. So it's important to take into consideration all of the possibilities of relationships involved and people involved, not just for the professional and like, I want to get another job's sake, but because I think it's important as a human being to conduct yourself in a way that's respectful and honorable. Sometimes you're gonna leave a gig because you got your dream gig. That is totally awesome. And I think you just need to be transparent with the artist that you're playing for or the band that you're in. Hey everybody, I know we've been doing this thing for a while, but I just got asked to do my absolute dream gig. I hate to do this right now, but I've got to do this gig. I got to take this gig because it's what I've wanted my entire life. And I think if the people that you're playing with right now really understand you, they'll respect your decision to follow your heart and follow your dreams. Maybe all of a sudden your solo career is taking off and you've been a part of somebody else's project for a while. That's totally fine. Again, I think artists will understand that because as somebody who's done my own project and hired people to be a part of my band, I would love to see them flourish in whatever it is that they feel they're being called to do. Not everybody is called to be an artist putting out their own albums. Not everybody is called to be playing for somebody else's band. But we all have our own things that we feel like we're meant to do in this world. And I think it's important that the people that we're working around understand that of us and that you understand that of them. And the other thing is, don't be scared. If you've been in a toxic situation for the last few years, go ahead and let yourself out that door and quit. Peace!